Hello and welcome to the No Man's Land podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Hoover. I'm a 17-year-old high school and college student, and I'm happy to be here with my much better looking co host, Elmer Fisher, who is my grandfather. And he's had a really fascinating life full of a bunch of riveting experiences, from his experience going blind, undiagnosed, where he felt kind of confused and trapped, trying to overcome his disability, and doing crazy things like skiing in the Paralympics. There just seems to be an endless list of accomplishments and obstacles that this man has overcome, and I'm very excited to be a small part in sharing some of those stories with you. So, how are you doing, Papa
I'm
Elmer?
okay. Uh, That sounds pretty good.
Thanks. Okay, so if you don't mind, just kind of introduce yourself, some basic things such as your name, your age, that you live in Ohio, and how long you've been blind for.
Okay, my name is Elmer Fisher. It's spelled name Fisher spelled with a C in it, which is a German spelling.
Mm-hmm.
Fisher with a German Fischer. It means a German fisherman. So my ancestry came from Europe. When I lived in my grandmother's house, she had come from Germany. She told a lot of stories about, no, a lot of, actually didn't tell a lot of stories. She said when she lived in the United States, she's in America now. She's going to live like an American. So she didn't hardly ever talk about Germany, which, to my regret, I would like to have known more. But so many of my relatives on my dad's side of the family spoke German or had an accent, a German accent. How old am I? I'm 86.
86.
86. I was born in 1933, so in August I'll be 87.
Yeah, our birthdays are pretty close, right? Because we both have our birthdays in August.
Yeah. When is yours?
August 24th.
You're a little younger than I am, though, I think.
Yeah, a little bit. I think you got me by a
Like
couple of
50
years.
years.
All right. So, you were born in Cincinnati, and you said you had kind of an interesting family and housing situation when you were growing up. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, it was basically a 5-room house with an attic.
Hmm.
So my mother, my father, and my grandmother, we lived on the first floor. Uh, and that's the only place. And the bathroom was on the first floor.
Hmm.
My aunt and uncle lived at the second floor, which was one flight up. They just had a very big kitchen, sort of combination kitchen, dining room, and a bedroom. And they lived upstairs. And up what we call the attic was just a big attic, open area. But they had to partition part of it off, so it was like a separate room. And some of the things I remember about it is the furnace, which was an old coal furnace, was directly below the straight pipe down to the furnace. So when they fire up that furnace, the heat would just pour out of the pipe. Of course, as the night went on, the fire would burn down. So by the time you woke up in the morning, you could almost see your breath in the air. It wasn't quite that bad, but it felt like it was. So it was a nice place to live. We
Yeah.
had an outhouse. Most people didn't know that.
Was that the only bathroom you had? Was an outhouse?
Yep. Yeah, well,
So yeah. So
it
how many
was,
people were living in the house with you? Because it sounds like you had quite a few people. So if there were like 5 rooms plus an attic in this house, how many people were living in it?
my mother and father and me, and my uncle and my aunt, and their daughter, my cousin. Later, and she had a little boy, got married. So that I don't know how many that is. But they had
That's
4
like
generations.
yeah,
I
that's
guess.
like 8 people,
Yeah,
7 or 8 people.
yeah.
So
Well,
yeah, it
yeah.
was it kind of cramped there sometimes living
Oh
in the
yeah, it
house?
would fall over each other a lot,
Hmm.
but it didn't seem to bother. Back then it wasn't unusual anyway. When we didn't consider ourselves to be deprived or anything. It's just the way it was,
Hmm.
and so we made the best of it. Kind of interesting stories about the outhouse. That was a little bit away from the house. So at night, if you had to go to potty, uh, you either had to walk outside and down the hill, or we had portable potties in the room, and you'd go and use that potty, and then when you woke up in the morning, you had to take it down and dump it out. But
Yeah.
Or that kind of interesting thing about that outhouse. When we finally got indoor plumbing, I guess I was about, I vaguely remember it. I was between 5 and 10 years old, somewhere maybe around 10 again. I don't know. And I remember when they put it in, uh, sitting there and talking to the plumber. But when we got later on, when we did a lot of fishing. So they got rid of the outhouse. They filled the hole with dirt.
Hmm.
But when we used to go fishing, we would dig that outhouse was a great place to find worms.
Oh,
So so whenever we would go fishing, you go down where the old outhouse was and dig in the ground, and there'd be hundreds of worms squirming around.
yeah.
So then you don't want. Then you think, oh, why am I going to eat those fish? Because they're going to eat these worms.
Outhouse.
Uh, yeah. uh, I grew up in a part of Cincinnati called Little Italy, and a lot of my neighbors were Italian. My best buddy's name was Romelli. They were good people. They had a little small. There's a big Catholic church down the road, but there also was a small one called San Antonio, and that was a very small for a Catholic church. It was very small. So all the Italians who lived in our neighborhood belonged to that little bitty church. So when they went to church, they went to a lot of times they spoke Italian. Uh, I remember they were notorious for having a fundraising fair in the summertime where you'd go and eat. And of course, they gambled like crazy. They had card games and everything else. Back there, that was legal.
Hmm.
So the Italians made a lot of money in the card games, playing games with the people that came.
So did you have any pets growing up?
Yeah, we always had a dog. Uh, the first dog we had, I don't remember. It was a German Shepherd, they tell me. I vaguely remember this dog, but I was about 5 or 6, I guess, when they got rid of the dog for one reason or another. And later on, I had a dog of my own, and he wasn't very well behaved, by the way.
He was
He,
a troublemaker.
oh yeah, yeah, he got into a lot of trouble, but he was my buddy, so
Yeah.
I sort of took care of him, but man, the agreement was that I was going to feed him and all that stuff, and take care of him, which I did for a while. Of course, like every kid, after a while, the mother takes over.
Yeah.
She didn't have. So my grandmother and my cousin, they took care of the dog.
Hmm.
Uh, One of the things I remember about the house, it had a flat roof on it, relatively flat. It sloped a little, of course, and it was a great place to fly kites. So we go up on the roof when it was breezy and fly a kite. Well, when you let the kite go, you're already 40 feet in the air, and we could really get some good kite. You could fly a kite up there when you couldn't get it off the ground down below.
Hmm.
When you get up on top of the roof, it was breezy enough to pick it up. There's stuff like that I remember. Uh, I remember the Italians and they had grape arbors because the Italians loved their wine.
Hmm.
So in the summertime, my buddies and I, we would go up and we would lay in the shade of a grape arbor, and you could reach up above your head would be bunches of grapes. So they didn't care how many you ate. You just had to lay out there in the sun or in the shade and eat grapes, and they make their wine, and they all get drunk. And, and they play their little accordion, like I think called a concertina or something like that. And they had a good time. They play and sing and dance, and they were good people. Of course, when we were German, and we would live with all the Italians. Well, there was another German family in the neighborhood. Their name was Schneider. So the two of us were all there, and the rest are all Germans. Petralio, Romelli. I can't remember all the names. There was a lot of them. The Later on, when pizza became more popular, when I was a little young, pizza was one not used that. I didn't even know what a pizza was until I was probably 10 years old. Anyway, they got into the pizza business. So they always made a lot of pizza, and I got to eat a lot of pizza growing up. And Our tomatoes were good. They always had, they used a lot of olive oil. I remember that. The house where I grew up, and we lived, and I'll let you know, from downtown Cincinnati, as the crow flies, it was no more than 3 or 4 miles.
Mm-hmm.
That's how close to downtown Cincinnati we lived. I remember when they put the sewer lines in, and they came along, and I used to sit there and watch the guys lay pipes in the street, and we thought we were something else, and we finally got indoor plumbing. They had a cistern for a while where they take the water. Cisterns, it's like a well, but the water comes from the roof of the house.
Mm-hmm.
So they had like a pipe that went off the roof of the house, and you fill up your cistern when it would rain. Then it was full, you divert that pipe away so it didn't overflow the cistern. So we had good water all year round. During the summer, if you're in a drought, at the time of the drought, the water, that cistern got pretty low. And I can remember my dad and my uncle cleaning it out one time. And the thing was full of worms. So I'm thinking, I've been drinking this water all the time, and it's got worms in it. But
Yeah.
I never drank one. But when we got down in the bottom of the well, you could see it. We raised chickens. Like I said, we were
Oh.
down in Cincinnati. They called a coop, a chicken coop. We had about 30 or 40 chickens, I guess. And my job was to feed them and to go get the eggs, which was kind of an interesting process because you got it. Once a hen laid an egg, she wanted to sit on it and hatch it. That's why they weren't laying their eggs. So I had to go reach under the chicken to get the egg from under the chicken. Well, they didn't like that. So they would peck your arm, try to keep you from getting the whole of the egg. That was kind of nonsense, but and they really when they were protecting their egg, they could peck pretty hard. So I grew up in very interesting. We lived in a valley. On either side of there was a big hill. On each hill there was a railroad track, and the one on our side of the hill was an old what they called narrow gauge railroad. It used to be a commuter train that ran from the west side of Cincinnati downtown. It was a commuter train, so they were running like a train, it wasn't a subway or an elevated car or something. They were running a train from down there to downtown Cincinnati. Well, this has been 70, 80 years ago when I was growing up.
Growing up, what did your parents do for work? And
uh, we grew up, my mother and my father worked for what they called the Methodist Publishing House. Yeah, there was a publishing plant in Cincinnati run and operated by the Methodist Church. And he was in charge of what they call the book binding department, right? Where they would fold papers and make books. And he was what they called his title was a book binder. They made Sunday school books and I guess the Bibles at one time, mostly teaching books that they used in the church. They would send them to the churches and they use it for teaching the kids. My mother later on, when I was a teenager, she went to work there too, but she worked in I think it was like a mailroom operation where they would pack up a lot of these books and periodicals and send them, mail them around the country. So she worked doing that. I think my dad worked in that book. It's called the Book Concern. God, he must have worked there 50 years. I don't think he ever had another job. At least not that I could remember.
mm-hmm.
He always worked at the same place. My aunt and my uncle who lived upstairs, he was a house painter. So he made his living by painting. And he would paint houses and rooms. And we lived in a big frame house. I remember maybe every 4 or 5 years, they would take their own house. They let me help.
Mm-hmm.
I could get up on a scale and a scaffold. Go up. I remember, you can envision this. The roof was relatively flat. So they had these big logs that are about 6 inches square and laid them across the roof. at the end stick over, and then you'd hook your scaffold onto the end that was sticking over the edge of the roof, and you pull yourself up and down. Start at the top, pull yourself all the way up to the top. Start painting, and as you paint it down, you would lower the scaffold, so you're always painting low where you just painted, like you normally would do. You start at the top and paint on down, and we used to do that. They let me paint some, much to their discretion, to the chagrin. I wasn't a very good painter either.
No.
uh, no, I probably wasn't seeing right, but it's kind of confusing. I still, in retrospect, I know now there were some things going on that I don't see because I don't remember it.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow I functioned and I made the adjustment. I don't know how. I got the nickname of Fudd. I don't know if you
Like
know.
like Elmer Fudd.
Yes. Of course, unfortunately, my name was Elmer.
Yep.
And I was a bumbling and stumbling Elmer. So I was a typical Elmer Fudd. And I got in a lot of fights about that. I didn't like it. So, but the Italian people were good people. When the church had their festivals, boy, the wine flowed like water. And they would sit around and play the accordion and dance and sing. And it was like being back in old Italy. Of course, we were German, so we went to the German. The church I went to, I was raised in. My mother and my grandmother one that started that church, I guess. And in the early days of the church, all their sermons were in German because they're all German people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then when the war came along, they were forced to stop speaking German because we were in war with Germany in World War I, I guess it was, and so they had to give up their German services. And but I can still remember on the walls of the church there were Bible inscriptions, and they were in German, not in English. They were built when the church was built. Everything was on the wall was in German. So those are my memories. I grew up around train tracks.
So could you speak German as a kid?
I know I never spoke a lot. I can understand some of it. I can't speak it. But when I was in high school, I remember taking German, the language. I go home and talk to my grandma. She said, "Nicht, nine, 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 nine." She just spoke a different dialect. She couldn't understand my German.
Oh.
So she would say nine, nine, which means no. And but so I had a lot of German history in my background, and that was tough for me during the wars because the 2 world wars we always were in the war with Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and people around us were Italian. They were fighting each other in Europe, but I would say we got along pretty good. I don't remember any spin-offs where that was really a big problem,
Mm-hmm.
except that you kind of always knew they were Italian. There was another family called Schneiders. They were German. They lived in the neighborhood. And Gearing, I think Gearing with an umlaut. You know what the umlaut is?
I do not.
You ever see the German with a vowel like an O with 2 dots above it?
Is that a letter? Oh yeah, a vowel. Okay, yeah.
Letter O, and that tells you instead of being O, it's It tells you how to pronounce the O.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the letter E. They were all vowels with 2 dots above it. It was E, not E. It was pronounced E. So that's what the umlaut. It tells you how to pronounce that particular vowel.
Mm-hmm.
So we raised chickens when I was a kid. I think I told you that.
Yeah, is there any other kind of like chores or odd things you had to do around your property that be maybe a little weird to someone like me who lives in a kind of a different age?
Well, no, we raised a garden. Probably 50% of the food we ate, especially in the wintertime, in the summertime, they would raise a lot of food, and we can it, save it for the winter.
Mhm.
and keep it in the basement where it was cooler. And it's kind of something. Every once in a while at night, you sleep and you hear boom, and I say, well, my uncle's Art. My uncle's name was Art. There goes another one of Uncle Art's jars,
Oh,
and the gas filled up so much in the jar,
it
and
would
we blew it
explode.
up. What a mess! The
Yeah.
sauerkraut all over the place. Uh,
Yeah, it's crazy.
I had a lot of fun memories. We had a coal furnace.
Hmm.
I can remember when the coal company they would deliver coal, they dump a big pile of coal outside the well, the window well that went down into the basement. Now it's big. They would send me down in my old dirty clothes, old coal clothes they call them, and they would hand me down big lumps of coal, and I would take it to the side of the coal bin. So I would start to fill up the coal bin, but you always filled it starting away from where the entrance was. So when you start building up your coal, as you got it full more and more, you kept working your way toward the entrance of the coal bin, which was a hole in the ground above your head, actually. Uh, when you got that thing full, that's how you got out of the damn place. You had to go, had to be pulled up out of the hole because you couldn't go back down because if you can visualize this, there was a door to the coal bin where you
Hmm.
would reach in and get the coal for the furnace. But they had planks, so they would lay planks starting at the bottom. I guess they were like 2 by 12s, and they would you lay it on a plank and you fill up the coal bin till you got to the top of that plank, that piece of wood. Then you put another piece on top of it, and you keep building it up till you got to the top of the door. Uh,
So how deep was that hole, would you say, like total?
how deep?
Yeah.
Uh, I guess about 8 feet, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
So yeah,
pretty good
especially if
stuff.
you're younger, if you get stuck at the bottom, that's gonna be a hard
Huh.
way to get out.
Well, I used to go down there, and when we put in coal, my mother would take me out and strip I'd be so covered with coal dust and stuff that she'd made me take all my clothes off before I came in the house. Uh, but it was a good life. I mean, we had a lot of good Italian friends. When you make sauerkraut, you use cabbage, and it has to ferment.
Hmm.
And I don't know, use a salt. They call it a starter. You had it in a big vat. And as the thing fermented, it would build up juice. So I would pick me up, I was about 8, 10 years old. They would put white socks on my feet. And they pick me up and I walk around and stomp in the sauerkraut. Because by doing that, I put pressure on it. That
Hmm.
squeezed the juice out of the sauerkraut. The juice would come up to the top. And then they would skim off the juice. So I was in charge of stomping the sauerkraut so they could skim the juice off of it. A lot of goofy things like that.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, you make me feel pretty good about my chores. I'm glad I didn't have to move all the coal or you know,
Up around the sauerkraut.
yeah, stomp on sauerkraut.
No,
So
I never thought anything of it really.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was probably just normal for you, right?
I had a special white pair of socks
Hmm.
that they put on me when I stomped the kraut.
So like while you were as a kid, did you move at all, or did you stay in that house basically throughout your
I
entire
only stayed there
childhood?
till I was about 15 or 16. Uh, my cousin and I, she's a girl, we slept up in the attic together. And my grandmother was there too. So my grandmother, my cousin, and me. So as my cousin and I got older, get to be close to teenagers or whatever, they decided we shouldn't sleep together anymore. So my mom and dad then moved out of the house. My grandmother. And it's kind of interesting. My grandmother and my aunt and uncle lived in the house too. So they sold the house to my aunt and uncle. But when my mother and I moved, my father moved away from our house. My grandmother wanted to go with us. She did not want to stay in in the old house with her other daughter-in-law, Aunt Louise, whom I loved, but she was kind of a I don't know, can you say she was a little bit flighty, and she didn't fit in the family very well. So when I was a great fan of hers, and she of me, and we got along great. But there's a lot of friction between the families because of, uh, they were very active in the church. My aunt and uncle,
Hmm.
which where I got most of my mother and father hardly ever went to church. One for my aunt Louise, I probably never would have gone to Sunday school, but uh, they took me to church, and my uncle was very active in the church. Church is still there. I don't know if it's operating or not. I kind of like to go back and see it. It sits on top of a hill. Cincinnati used to be called a city of seven hills, actually. There's a lot of hills and valleys. And in the summertime or in wintertime when there were no leaves on the tree, you could see across the valley to our church, which was sitting on the opposite hillside. You could see the church. It's like it's sitting up in the sky. It was a kind of interesting place. But then when the trees got full of foliage, the leaves would block the view. So every fall you get to see the church again. Uh, it's evangelical. It's called an evangelical church.
Hmm.
And the inscriptions on the wall, I think I told you, were all in German,
Hmm.
started by a German congregation. Uh, and they built this thing on top of a hill. And I can remember my grandmother was all upset because the church started off down in the valley at the foot of the hill. Of course, that was pretty easy to get to. And
Hmm.
especially back then, they had horse and buggies. So they decided they wanted to be on top of the hill, so they had the view. So they put the church on top of the hill. Well, I mean, you really had to work hard to walk up. They're very steep, not too long, but once you got up there, it was a heck of a view. You could actually see downtown Cincinnati from the top of the hill, which is about 5 miles away, I guess.
Going back to your pet, your dog, do you have any? You said he was a troublemaker. Did he do any, like, do you have any crazy stories or interesting things about him?
It wasn't a very friendly dog.
No.
He bit me many times. You know, if if I he got aggravated, I play with him and I get a little bit too rough. He didn't know how to play. He would start to get very aggressive, and I don't know how many times he bit me, but we tolerated it. I learned I learned what not to do after a while. But then and he passed away, and that's the dog I remember the most.
So, what did your family like to do for fun, or what special occasions did your family have that were unique to you growing
Go
up?
out and drink beer. I'm serious.
Hmm.
We would go. Great. We'd go to each other's house. My aunt and uncle, my grandparents. Saturday night was the night to go visit, and I'd go to one of their houses. They would drink beer and turn on the radio and dance. Uh, it was quite a festive evening. My parents and my family, my two aunts and two uncles and their family had a good old time on Saturday night, dancing and drinking beer. Uh, the saloon where we got the beer was about a block away from where the house was. So I can imagine they used to send me down like an 8 or 10 year old with a gallon jug, and the bartender would sell me the beer. I'd give me $1, I give it to the bartender. He'd fill up the jug, and I carried up to the house where they would drink it until it was empty. Then they send me back down. Sometimes I got a half a jug, depending on how much they needed anymore. Uh,
So, is that just like
well,
a gallon jug, or how big was it?
it was bigger than it was more like 2 gallons, I think. Gallon
Okay.
and it was gallon and a half.
Gallon and a half.
Pretty good sized jug.
Yeah.
Uh, I know it's hard to carry. A little hole you put your fingers through to hold it, and I'd have to stop sometimes. Uh, Coming home, my finger wouldn't take it. A lot of the jugs got broken in the process. Every beer every place. No, it ain't a big problem. Let's get another jug. And buddy's name was Romelli.
Uh-huh.
and they owned the saloon.
What were you kind of like as a kid growing up? Were you a troublemaker? Were you a good student?
Oh
What kind of
no,
category did you fall into?
I was an angel.
You were
I'm
an
not
angel.
kidding. Oh yeah, I was afraid to get go. I get I was there were four generations in the house, and I was the youngest one. So if I stepped out of line, I had three other generations to yank me back. And my cousin was a little older than me, so no, I was a well-behaved kid because, well, they were German. They're very strict. No messing around. You
Hmm.
know, you did what you're supposed to do, and I never felt mistreated, but I sure listened. I sure obeyed, and I never got out of line, or there would be hell to pay.
Yeah.
So, but it was still a good. I had a good life. I wouldn't trade it for anything else. You know,
What would have been like a punishment if you'd misbehaved?
they just scold me, embarrass
Uh-huh.
me. I don't ever remember being hit. You know, or spanked or struck. They would holler at me, embarrass me that way, uh, and make a spectacle out of me. I guess you might say.
You were talking about some, things that you had in your house growing up, and how you went from having an outhouse, and as you grew up, you guys got plumbing. Were there any other kind of amenities or inventions that you remember being like really cool to have, or kind of blew your mind growing up that you got?
Well, I had a sister when I was real young. You know what a cistern is?
I do not.
Okay, that's a hole in the ground. If you saw it, you'd think it was a well. Like a well in a hole in the ground, and you had a pipe that went up to the roof of the house. So when it rained, you take that drain pipe and direct the water into the cistern to hold. Then when the cistern got full, you would divert the flow so it wouldn't overflow. So that's how you kept your water supply up. You used that pipe. And
Hmm.
when it rained, you would divert enough water into the hole so you'd have water to use. I don't never remember running out of water. Uh, had a lot, we raised a lot of gardens. We had about an acre and a half of ground, I guess, where we raised tomatoes and peppers and onions and things like that,
Hmm.
lettuce. And then my parents made a lot of canned a lot of that food, preserved it.
So what did you kind of do, like growing up with your friends for fun? What would be some of your like go-to
Well,
activities?
and we played street baseball. We had a street that we lived in. When I got back far enough, there was hardly any traffic. So we played baseball. And we played in the street. And, you know, home plate was at one end and second base at the other end, and you first and third base off to the side. So when you hit the ball, well, you ran down the street more or less to the first step. And if you hit it far enough while you're under the, if you hit it far enough, it would roll way down the street. Well, it rolled the way down the street while you could walk around the bases before
Hmm.
they would get to it. Uh, so we played a lot of baseball that way.
Was
And we were
that
big.
was that like your dream job growing up? Would be like to have been a professional baseball player? Like growing up, what was kind of like what did
Well,
you aspire to be? I suppose.
I was never very good. And in retrospect, I know I wasn't very good because I wasn't seeing
Hmm.
properly. Uh, like we'd be playing ball in the afternoon. We'd start to be twilight. It'd be around 6, 7 o'clock. We'd be playing ball. And all of a sudden, I couldn't see the ball anymore. It started too dark. Well, the other kids were still playing. No problem. They played for like another hour, maybe hour, half hour to an hour before they would have to stop playing. But I had to stop playing long before that
Hmm.
uh, because of, I guess you call it night blindness. Uh,
Yeah.
but it was never diagnosed. You know,
So is that
I
like your maybe first kind of inkling that like, hey, this is something kind of different, or but nobody else has, or any other things growing up that maybe were like your first sign that like, hey, something's ain't right?
Well, I knew I was different, and I didn't like it because the kids would make fun of me. I was different. Uh, and you don't. I knew I wasn't blind because I could see them, and I could see the ball. It wasn't very close to me, but when it started to get close to me, it would disappear because the visual field was so small.
Mm-hmm.
But when you can see, I knew, on the chart, I think I told you, on the eye chart, 20/20 was perfect vision,
Mm-hmm.
and you saw the bottom line 20 feet away. And if your vision was 20/30, that meant that other people could get 30 feet away from the same chart and see it as well as you could at 20 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So my vision was 20/30, which meant I had to be 10 feet closer to most other people to see small. And these are small objects like, well, I had a lot of trouble in school. Oh, I had a lot of trouble in school. I was never diagnosed. So I always wanted to sit in the front of the house, front of the room so I could see the chalkboard. Well, some teachers didn't like that. I thought, and some of the other kids didn't like that. I thought I was being favored. But if I sat back, like in the second row or behind, I couldn't see the board. So that I would prevail upon them. Let me sit. You know, I'm surprised I got an education at all because I was treated like a fully sighted kid, and I wasn't. Uh,
Yeah.
in retrospect, that's the way I was raised. But the positive side of that is that I learned a lot of way to adapt. You know, and I had a lot of adaptation skills because I had to learn how to live with my visual loss. It would it wasn't compensated for to a 20 degree. And I had to handle it myself. So in some ways, when I got older, uh, I got involved with some other blind people, and I was a lot more functional than they were uh, because I had been doing stuff that they weren't doing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's kind of complicated, but in retrospect, I wouldn't change anything. I
Yeah.
still had a good time, and I did all right in school. I made A's and B's, but I know if I'd had better eyes, I would have made all A's because I was so darn slow. I remember take a test, I was the last one to finish. They would make me stop. Sometimes I wasn't done with it, so all the ones I knew I was going to have trouble getting. I knew I was going to have trouble getting through the thing because I read so slow, and I would go through the test and answer the questions I knew, and I'd go back and try to find the ones I didn't answer, and just jumping back and forth trying to finish the test.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it made me somewhat resourceful, but it was pretty difficult.
Yeah, so obviously, you knew you had some troubles with it. What did you try to kind of like fix that problem? Obviously, you could do some things like sit close to the board, but did you try glasses? Did you go to any
Well,
doctors? Kind of what was your?
glasses help to a certain extent. The retinitis I had, but the glasses would correct what they call astigmatism. That's when you look at something that's real fuzzy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like having binoculars. You look through them and you got to adjust them to wind it in and out to get it focused. That's the way glasses are. Uh, but they wouldn't help you if the weather was dark or if it was when the lighting was low. Glasses wouldn't help at all.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they would be more of a deterrent because when you had glasses on, you reduce your visual field because you're seeing more stuff in a little same area of space. Uh, so it was sometimes it would have made it harder to see, especially at night. So I was what they call night blind.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
I have a
and they
cousin
said,
who has that actually.
but see, I had as a kid, I was never recognized. I never recognized them. I was just dumb. I was clumsy. Uh, I could play. I mean, the day there, I could play basketball with the best of them. I was going to high school. We had outdoor courts. Hell, I used to play basketball with the guys that are on the basketball team. I could beat them. I could play as well as they did, sometimes better. and go into inside the gym, and the guy threw me a ball, hit me square in the face, and that was a big deal. I couldn't see it inside.
Mm.
I didn't know what was wrong with me. Uh, it's very confusing, Nathan.
Yeah, I bet. I can't imagine. Like,
It's,
that would be really frustrating.
well, it was. It was embarrassing and frustrating, and sometimes very awkward. But I got by. I had a lot of friends. Uh, they called me Daddy Hawkeyes for a while. That was a nickname I got. They knew I couldn't see with the crap, so they called me Hawkeyes. Uh, and they sort of handled it that way. But they always accepted me. And I can't say in retrospect that anybody ever took advantage of me either. I mean, they always accommodated my visual problem. Uh, so I had a good time growing up as a kid. I love the Italians.
Hmm.
Uh, I love their festivals and all kind of wine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you like your wine, and you're quite a connoisseur of wine and alcohol.
Well, I know what they call Dago Red. That's what they called their wine. Dago Red was a red wine made with grapes. Of course, they're all Italians. They call it Italian. I don't know where they got that. They call it Italian a Dago. Did you know? You ever heard that expression, Dago?
There you go. No.
Italians a Dago. Why it is, I don't know. So their wine was called Dago Red. Uh, and as a kid, family, the adults were around sipping wine. If you were a kid, if you want a sip of wine, you could go ahead and have a sip. I don't ever, I don't remember getting drunk as a kid, but then never had that. Like I grew up with it. It was like drinking water.
Hmm.
Drinking water. Of course, on my side of the family was beer, and during Prohibition, there's a time when you couldn't make alcohol. It was outlaw.
Yeah,
Uh,
the prohibition, right?
yeah, and my aunt, my dad, my uncle would brew their own beer,
Hmm.
and they store it in the basement. During the night, you hear pop. Well, what happened is another bottle of beer exploded because it built up too much gas pressure for the bottle, and it
Yeah.
broke the bottle. Oh, it's kind of a unique way. But I had a good time growing up. I don't have any regrets. It was part of the times. It was part of the time.
Yeah. So, what activities did you kind of participate in, or in school? Were you in any sports or clubs or anything like that?
Well, I tried to play baseball, and as long as the lighting was right and everything was all right, I could play pretty well. Uh, I used to go. We went out. I think I might have told you when we went to high school. We had basketball courts outside.
Hmm.
And we play outside. I could play with anybody. Always involved in music from as long as I can remember. How I got started, I don't remember. All I know is my parents always encouraged it, promoted me, I guess. So I did a lot of, as a kid, I grew up singing in all kind of choirs.
What instruments did you learn how to play? What instruments did you play?
Well, I play the piano, uh, sort of. I can still sort of play. I'm not real good at it, but I learned music on the piano, meaning I learned chords, chord progressions, and majors and minors, augmented chords, diminished chords. I learned that all on the piano.
Hmm.
By one thing about the piano, when you play the piano, you're playing all the notes that are in the song. Like an orchestra, the violin's playing one line and the trumpet's playing something else, and so forth and so on. You're only playing one note, but when you're doing a piano, you're playing them all with different fingers or hitting different keys. Maybe not every key, but the piano. If you knew how to play the piano, you understood music because you couldn't play the piano if you didn't understand music.
Hmm.
You didn't you had to understand chords, and now they were put together and they were built. The spacing between the keys and all that kind of stuff. So, uh, so I always liked music. And I can't say I was very, very good at the piano. But of course, then I got into singing and did a lot of singing as I was growing up. High school, I used to have shows, and I was always in what the heck did they call it?
Plays
Something
or
show tunes or something like that. Once a year, and then if kids would audition, and they would do different acts. Some would play drums and some musical stuff, and I always was involved with singing. Sometimes solos, sometimes I was in like a quartet, sometimes I was in a small choir. Uh, so I got a lot of good singing in when I was growing up in high school, uh, which kind of was nice for me because it made me sort of special in some respects. I
Mhm.
mean, I was having all this other trouble visually, so but when it came to music, I was a top banana. uh, and the kids always, I had fun with kids. They called me Daddy Hawkeyes. I think I told you that.
Yeah.
That was the name I ended up. But it was like an endearing term.
Hmm.
They didn't say it to criticize me, but they just called me Daddy Hawkeyes because I knew I couldn't see where the hoot, and still I would function with them. And if they got out of line, I would beat the heck out of them. So
So, were there any crazy pranks or anything like that you can remember at your school that happened?
pranks.
Hmm.
Yeah, I can't think of any. We know broke several windows with a baseball. I remember that. We had at lunchtime. You had like 45 minutes to eat your lunch, and then you go outside and play as long as you want. Well, you run downstairs and gobble up your food, eat your lunch in about 5 minutes, and you run outside and start playing. And I remember a couple times. One time especially, I got out real early, and I was tossing ball with a buddy of mine, and one of my throws went over his head, went through the went through a window,
Oh no.
across, across the floor inside, and all the way down the steps inside the school to the basement. Of course, it made a hell of a noise, a lot of broken glass everywhere. But I was reprimanded for it, but never. I wouldn't say I was ever punished. Uh, they kind of let us do our thing.
Hmm.
Uh, that's about it.
Did
Can't think
you,
of it.
yeah, in school, did you have any teachers that you remember had a really big impact on you, whether positively or negatively?
No, I was always apprehensive on the teachers because I knew I couldn't see right, and some of them then wouldn't accommodate me, or it was more of a problem. In fairness to them, I didn't look like I was having a problem. You can't you can't see and tell me what I'm not. You can't look at me and know what I'm not seeing. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Uh, so I would get up out of the chair and walk right into the wall. Visual loss is kind of a funny thing. Like I used to say, we had kids that had physical problems. They had maybe a limp or a crooked arm or some other thing, but when they function, you could see the problem.
Hmm.
Uh, well, a person with a visual loss, they just do dumb things. You don't know what you're not seeing. The people they're looking at you don't know what you're not seeing. They don't know what's wrong with you. Uh, it's in, it's embarrassing to have a visual loss and grow up as a kid. You uh, I know the kids that had physical problems. They were a lot more accepted than I was.
Hmm.
The other the other kids that had problems, some of them were the kids that had a hearing loss. Uh, in fact, I think they had it worse than me because you don't know it. You sit there like a dummy, and everybody else could hear what was going on, and they didn't know.
Hmm.
And they appeared to be stupid. If I didn't know what was going on, everybody kind of understood it because I couldn't see it. Couldn't see the blackboard or the paper. But a kid who was deaf or hard of hearing would miss out a lot on lecture. So, and And I don't remember going back then. I don't remember any accommodation for us as kids who had those problems. Now you have special classes and all that stuff, which I'm happy for. But I don't remember ever having anything like that. I was just put in regular class. The teacher might be saying, "Well, he can't see, or he has trouble seeing." Here and there, I was really legally blind at times, I guess. Didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so it was kind of confusing. Anyway,
Did you work anywhere in high school?
yeah, I worked. A friend of ours was a big shot in the county. He was like a commissioner, and during the summer they would hire high school kids to go along the road, along where the guardrails were and the stop signs and the street signs,
Mm-hmm.
where the weeds would grow up and cover the sign or cover up the road or cover up the railing. We sent us out, and we had sickles and scythes, and we had to cut down. We had to cut down the tree, all cut down all the growth so people could see the sign, or they could see the fence. We kind of kept the edge of the roads clean, uh, but that was quite a job. Bunch of high school guys. We would mess around more than we would work. So our our poor foreman, he was always on our case because we would he was older guy, so he'd fall asleep at lunch. We'd all be real quiet so we didn't wake him up. He might sleep for 2 hours. Well, during those 2 hours, we didn't have to work. We were just waiting for him to wake up. So he had to be real quiet and not to wake up. His name was Shepherd, I guess. And if we tried not to wake him up, because once he got woke, he would be angry with us and he'd make us go to work, and then he'd drive us to work, push us to work a little harder. But it was a good time. I mean, we had fun kids. I remember girls, when we would walk along the road, about 8 or 10 young men. We got so houses where there'd be a bunch of, got to know the houses where all the girls hung out. And as we got near the houses, they would holler at us and whistle and, "Come on down, you guys." Well, of course, the foreman wouldn't let us come down, but they would tease us like that. Well, to go to school, or I think I told you there were 2 railroad tracks.
Mm-hmm.
To get to school, I would walk the railroad track to school. Uh, and there was one track that didn't. They used to run a train, but to keep they stopped the train, but whoever had the franchise didn't want to give it up, but they had to run a vehicle on it in order to justify keeping it. So twice a day, a guy they call it a hand car, and a car you stand up and pump it.
Mm-hmm.
He'd go from one. It was about 5 miles. He would go from one end of the track to the other every day, so they could say they were using the trestle or using the track. Uh, and I spent a lot of time around train tracks. Spent a lot of time around trains. Get up to walk along the train. And when those big engines had come by, I'm telling you, the closer they got, the bigger they got. And when they got right in front of you, those things were huge. And
Did you ever
the
try to hitch a ride on one, like as it was
yeah,
going by?
yeah, they had what they call box cars. They were cars with doors on them, and they come by and they were empty. We jump on and ride in a box car. I had to ride to school. The only problem is you got to they don't stop, and so you got to be very careful getting on, especially getting off,
Mm-hmm.
because if the engineer decided he wanted to speed it up, he'd be going pretty fast, and you get to the point where you had to get off to go to school. Well, the engine be moving at pretty good speed, so you kind of learn how to get off of a moving train without breaking your neck. I got lucky; I didn't break anything, but you kind of run alongside the train before you let go. If you can envision that, try to keep up with it with your feet. These trestles, because they were old steam engines, they had barrels of water on on the trestle, huge barrels of water. So if a train would accidentally drop a red hot amber or some cinder that was really hot, might burn the trestle, they would have to stop and they go to one of these big barrels of water. They had a pail or a bucket, and they come back and throw it on that ember to put it out. But one thing about this, you're walking across, some of these trestles are pretty long, and especially if it's going downhill. I remember lots of times got out near the middle of the trestle, and all of a sudden a train had come up behind me. I knew I couldn't outrun it, but I had to get out of the way. So I would run to where these water barrels are. And you hang on the side of the trestle, and on the on the platform where the water barrel was, you could stand there. But as the engineers went by, they saw you standing there. And they wait till they get right next to the barrel, and then they blow steam in your face. Shh, big puff of steam would come out of the side of the engine, and those guys would laugh. But they never hurt us. No, we had a lot of fun with them.
Hmm.
Those were good times.
Never put like coins on the railroad track.
Oh yeah, yeah, quite a few pennies that were big as $half. But you didn't want to do too much because money was too hard to come by.
Yeah,
Uh,
so what was like your wage for that job you were telling me about a little earlier, cutting the grass with the sickles? What was like your
I think it
wage?
was like 50 cents an hour.
50 cents an
Something like
hour? Do you know what minimum wage is now today?
that. No,
It is a little over $11 an hour.
no. I don't think it had anything to do with minimum wage back then. I don't remember such a term. They just paid you. They just paid you what they thought they could get away with.
Yeah.
Really. Uh, and the high school guys, in fact, to get on that crew, um, you had to be able to pull some strings. A couple of one of my neighbor, church guys, and as a neighbor, he was a big shot in the county. So when the jobs were open up, he would always vouch for me, and he would always give me a county job, cutting the weeds and all that stuff. So
Hmm.
unless you knew somebody like administration or some higher up, you had a hell of a time getting a summer job. But I was lucky. I knew my neighbor was well established in the hierarchy, so he always made sure that I got a summer job cutting weeds. But the downside of that was weed poisoning. I can remember every year I'd get poison ivy of some kind. Or there was a couple of friends of mine, they had weed poisoning so bad they couldn't work. I mean, their arms would be covered from their shoulders down to their wrists with bandages. From They'd be seeping from skin poisoning from the weeds. Uh, but that's the way it was. I don't know what they do now. Probably they got something to put on them now, I guess.
Or
Oh
like a
yeah,
machine probably that just does it.
yeah, yeah. But we didn't know any different, you know. Like 50 years from now, somebody will be talking about what it was like it is like your age or now.
Yeah, I mean, even in the short time I've been here, there's been like quite a few things that have changed in terms of how jobs are done. Like even stuff like the garbage, right? Like it used to be for at least me growing up, I would wait for the garbage man to come so I could see the truck when I was little, and he'd
Yeah,
pick up the the garbage can put in the back, and now they have these arms that do it for them where you just drive the truck up to the can and it picks it up and dumps it in the back of the truck and then sets it down. So it's crazy. I can't imagine because just in the short little while I've been here, already so much has changed.
the early garbage trucks were just a big open bed truck, and a guy would sit up. The guy rode in the truck, and when they get the garbage cans, they would hand the can up to him, and he would dump it in the truck. So
Hmm.
he'd be walking around in garbage all day, dumping down, filling up the truck. He had boots on, and they would throw the can, and he would throw the empty can back. They got pretty good at it. They could throw those garbage cans 10 feet. The guy would reach out and grab it with one arm.
Yeah, probably got pretty strong from that too.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. A lot of physical labor that now will be done automatically, I guess.
Yeah. So it sounds like to me, you always had kind of like some vision problems when you were younger, but
Oh yeah.
when did it kind of switch over from being those like issues we've already talked about to being completely blind, like to the point where you couldn't see anything? how long was that kind of transition, and when did it take place?
You know, it might sound strange, but it's such a gradual change. And there are so many factors involved, like lighting. You know, I could see one thing a certain feet away, and the next time I looked at that thing, I couldn't see it because the lighting was different. Uh, I don't know if I answered your question, but it was very confusing. All I knew, I was having trouble, and so whenever whenever we changed classes uh, at the beginning of the school year, we got our schedule, and we had to switch teachers. I would hope and pray that I could get a seat, and they would seat you alphabetically. Like it started in the front row on the left, going back A, B, C, D, with my name being F. I either ended up usually on the end of the first row, which was a disaster. I was way back far from the room, from the board, or by the time they got to F, depending on what other kids are in the class, I mean the F might be beginning in the second row. Well, that was great for me because my name maybe F would be the first seat in the second row. Well, I'd
Hmm.
be right in front. But then I tell the teacher I can't see what's going on, and they didn't like that. And teachers are not very tolerant. What do you mean you can't see? You'll be all right. You know, or they make me sit up in front, right in front of the board, and everybody could see me, and that was embarrassing. But I'm making it sound like it was terrible. It was just a challenge. Uh, but all the kids accepted me, so I went on to college, got my degrees. Uh, I, when I was getting my degrees, I just kept going to school. I thought, hell, I can't get a job. I can't see very well. I'll just keep going to school. So when I ran out of degrees, I went to work.
So, who kind of supported you through the process of going blind? Who was kind of there to help you figure it out? And how did you kind of
Um,
cope with it?
I can't think of anything. It sounds strange, but I was just expected to deal with it, which I did. I mean, I learned a lot of skills and adaptive techniques that I developed myself. When I was growing up, my parents, they didn't allow for my vision. I wasn't given any support. They sent me to school. I was expected to go to school and I was expected to excel, which I managed to do, but I wasn't given any concession, any help. There was a time I could say, Nathan, when I went through the whole year and never read a book. I would get everything I learned from listening and lecture and making notes on my own. There were times when I had a book, I never read it because I couldn't read it I couldn't read it fast enough to be any good. So, but I learned what I needed to know in class. So as a result, I was a good student, but I wasn't an A student. Some of the stuff I didn't know because it was in the book I couldn't read,
Hmm.
but I would pick it up from the lecture and discussions in class. And so I became a good listener. To this day, I'm a great listener. Ask your grandma. I listen to her all the time. She's laughing. Uh, so I got most of my stuff through listening. Uh, I did become a good listener. Uh,
I guess you mentioned that Pete Rose. You went to your high school. Did you have any interactions with him or any stories about him?
no, he was in a different grade. When I went to high school, there was junior high and senior high, so there were 6 levels.
Hmm.
So we were in there at the same time, but when I was like a senior, he might have been a freshman or something like that.
Yeah.
And he was around, but I wasn't that close to him because there's quite a difference in our age.
Yeah.
Uh, but I remember him in school, and he was always in trouble. I know that.
He was a
Uh,
troublemaker.
but he used to go to the Reds games a lot. That was always fun. I had to walk about 5 miles to the ballpark, which I did. They had something called Knot Hole Day when you're in high school or in school. They would give you something called a knot hole. was a card with your name on it. It was called a knot hole card.
Mm-hmm.
And on Saturday was knot hole day. So if you had one of those cards, you always got in the park free as long as you showed the card. You know why they called it a knot hole card?
Why?
Years ago, they had the big wooden fences around the baseball park, and the kids to sneak up and peek on the game, they were wood fences. They were called knot holes in them from the wood.
Oh.
You peek through the hole and to see the field. Some of them are pretty big, depending on where they're located. Why it's called knot hole. So you watch the game through a knot hole. So when you got a card, it's got a knot hole card.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of goofy, but that's the way it was.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So, you went to college. You got your what did you get your degree in?
Well, I started off in music, and that didn't go very well because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So a lot of my buddies were going to UC at the time, and they're in business administration. So I forgot what my degree was in, industrial engineering, I guess. I would look at jobs and set up time standards of how long it would take to do a job. People were paid by piecework.
Mm-hmm.
I'd set up work where you had to assemble something. I would be set up the workplace so that it could be used most efficiently. It's called industrial engineering, which I like doing. It was pretty much fun. I worked for Kroger. I got into packaging development. Some of the packages I worked on ended up in museums in Washington. There was one called a circus wagon, and I designed it. But packaging was quite interesting because the package had to protect the product. It had to be the right size. If it was too big, you had what they call fill requirements. You couldn't put a package on the shelf that was half full, make it look like you're getting more than you got. I think it was like 80% had to be product or something like that. So I had to set up specifications for all that, and I can't remember all the other stuff. Oh yeah, you had to get the right material because some of the product had to be protected. You had polyethylene, you had cellophane, you had something called cage films. Depending on the nature of the candy or the product, you had to specify what materials they use to protect the product. But you couldn't put it in a barrel because, or something, be ridiculous. It had to be saleable too. It had to be able to be merchandise. It had to go up on a shelf. It had to be appealing enough so people would pick it up. It had to protect the product. So you're always filling around between product protection and saleability to try and strike a balance between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So I was called an industrial engineer. I had to set up workstations, and these bags come along with different kind of candy. When I worked for Kroger, I worked in their candy department. I think they had about 300 different items. In fact, it was the second largest candy plant in the world outside of Brock. Brock Candy was the biggest, but our Kroger plants were bigger, or just as big almost. And I designed packages so they could be hand filled or machine filled. I didn't know how the machine worked. I didn't know what kind of materials could be run on the machine, but the shooter on the machine also had to be able to protect the product, but it also had to be saleable. I mean, it can't make the product so bad that nobody will pick it up. It's quite an interesting job. I enjoyed it. Got a lot of candy to eat.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's probably a good perk for working at a candy factory.
When you work at candy, they had a candy plant. They also had a nut roasting facility where they would be deep frying nuts, cashews, and almonds, and all this stuff. And they come out on a cooling belt. You walk down the aisle, and there'd be this cooling belt piled up with peanuts on it, or cashews, or almonds being cooled. And they told us, now, if you come in here eat all the stuff you want to eat, but don't take any out of the door. If you got caught taking a kernel home, you were fired. But they didn't care how much you ate when you're in the plane. Well, they knew after a while you got tired of it. You know, you're gonna only eat the same candy all the time for a
Yeah.
while. So, you could eat all you wanted while you're in the store or in the plant, but don't take it outside the door.
Well, I'm going to have to cut it short there for now. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like the podcast and follow us on all our social media platforms so that you never miss another episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we can't wait to see you at the next podcast. Bye bye.